So we've officially hit the limit. In a letter this morning to House Speaker McCarthy, Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says the U.S. government is now working under, quote, extraordinary measures to pay the nation's bills. Yellen predicting the U.S. will default on June 5th if Congress doesn't raise the debt limit. But with no compromise in sight, will Speaker McCarthy do what Speaker Boehner did in 2011 and compromise to avoid a global financial meltdown? Before retiring from the Senate, Pennsylvania's Pat Toomey was the top Republican on the Banking Committee and also serving on the Budget and Finance Committees. And he joins me now here in Washington. It's great to see you, Senator.
Thanks for having me, Andrea.
Well, congratulations for being out of the mess. You've graduated, yeah. But your wealth of experience in the House and the Senate with so much change. Can you see Kevin McCarthy with the deals that he has made to become Speaker after that, which you can only describe as a debacle of a week? That was hardly a great kickoff for the celebration of them taking over. With all of those deals, how does he make the kind of compromises that are almost unavoidable down the road?
Yeah, so I'm not sure that the specific terms of the deal that got him his speakership were really all that unreasonable. In fact, I think many of them were not unreasonable to do individual appropriation bills, for instance, in some sequence rather than a multi-thousand-page bill at the end of the year. That's completely reasonable, right? To have an open amendment process so that members have a chance to weigh in on the substance of the bill. That's completely reasonable. The question, in my mind, becomes when Republicans attempt to do that, maybe they pass a bill in the House, but when it is unacceptable to the president, it's unacceptable to Chuck Schumer and Democrats in the Senate, and some negotiation has to occur, does the outcome of that negotiation precipitate the attempt to dethrone him from Speaker? Or will it be deemed acceptable that we put up the best fight we could, but after all, Democrats control 2/3 of the elected parts of government, so we're not going to win everything? And that's the question we haven't seen yet.
Yeah, I mean, everyone has their principles, and as you point out, that a lot of those agreements were based on abuses that had been,
right.
in effect. But what about the motion to vacate with just one person being able to trigger that? He's handcuffed himself in a lot of ways.
So that's been in place many times in the past. Right. It was just in a different political culture when it wouldn't occur to anyone to do it. And that's the kind of thing that I'm referring to. If Leader McCarthy gives Republicans an opportunity to demonstrate their principles, passes what legislation he can, and then ends up having to negotiate something less than what's ideal from a Republican point of view, for the obvious reason that Republicans don't control all of government, does that precipitate the one individual? And by the way, that could come from the other side, right? A Democrat could decide to file the motion to vacate the chair. We'll see how people react when it comes to that, if it does.
I mean, you've been raised in a culture of reasonableness. When when you've lost a fight and when the government is going to default and it could precipitate a global meltdown, you know what the stakes are. And you had principles about fiscal sobriety that were very important to you, but you went along with a couple of comments. Well, you voted against the debt ceiling raise.
Oh, I did. And I disagree with the characterization. I understand it's universal that if we don't raise the debt ceiling by a particular date, we'll have this financial crisis. That will not happen. And let me just tell you why. It's very simple. The disaster scenario that people talk about is defaulting on our debt, defaulting on our sovereign debt, the securities that are the basis of the capital markets around the world. The interest payments on our debt adds up to about $400 billion this year, according to the CBO. Tax revenue alone is almost $5 trillion. A Treasury Secretary would have to willfully decide that I'm going to precipitate a default on our debt.
But
so that's not going to happen.
We did get downgraded. It cost us.
That was ridiculous.
It cost us, but that's the marketplace.
Ridiculous.
So it cost us a couple of billion dollars.
There's a couple of firms that privately made that decision. There's going to be no default on the debt, even if we go past the date. The worst thing that would happen is some vendors wouldn't get paid on time. They'd have to wait, and that's not ideal.
And a shutdown is expensive.
And a shutdown, it'll be a partial shutdown, not ideal. But I think you do have to weigh this in the context of a completely unsustainable fiscal mess that we're in. 100% debt to GDP ratio right now, growing rapidly. This is not sustainable, and it's unreasonable for President Biden to say, I refuse to even negotiate about this.
Well, that's a strategy. That's a strategy. The Trump tax cuts, some would say, contributed to all of this, and then COVID
let's
and
talk
the big
about
spending.
So the tax cuts of 2017 that you referred to as the Trump tax cuts ushered in tremendous economic growth, record low unemployment, wage gains that were outpacing inflation. And today, Andrea, the federal government's taking in more revenue, tax revenue, than was projected prior to the tax reform. So it's clear that the tax, and by the way, total revenue is above the historical average as a percentage of our economy. Corporate tax revenue above the historical average. So that the tax reform of 2017 has been terrifically pro-growth and constructive. Not a problem here.
Although hardly progressive. Let me move on. Let me move on, though, to candidate quality.
Okay.
Which is a polite way of saying the disastrous campaigns in a couple of states, including your own in Pennsylvania, that Senate seat was totally winnable by the Republican mainstream candidate, let's say primary candidate David McCormick.
So I have a slightly different take. So first of all, I think it was a very winnable race. Dr. Oz was actually a good candidate. He was a good candidate. He was credible. I spent time with him on the campaign trail. I was very impressed by him. The problem that we had in Pennsylvania is the gubernatorial nominee was a disaster. Lost the state by 15 points. Nobody loses Pennsylvania. It's just way too close a state to lose by that much. He didn't even run a campaign. And it was just, I think it was impossible for everyone down ballot to overcome that headwind. And Oz lost, but lost by more like 4 points, not 15. And we lost 3 House seats that we should have won, 3 of them. All because, in my view, the disaster at the top of the ticket.
What about the Republicans standing by George Santos, who is a disgrace, a fraud? They seated him because McCarthy needed every vote. Now he's on committees. How do you stand behind a guy like that?
Well, so my own, I won't speak for others, but I will tell you my view is the man should resign. The man, he was elected under absurdly false pretenses. He's obviously got serious psychological problems. He's a serial liar. He shouldn't be there. However, having said that, I'm not sure it's the job of Congress to decide to overrule the electorate and say, oh, well, he told too many lies. You know, he shaded the truth too much. I mean, do we really want to get Congress in the business of overruling electorates? The electorate is going to throw this guy out if he lasts that long, is my guess. I would be very reluctant to have Congress do that unilaterally.
And what do you do if Donald Trump is the Republican nominee in 24?
I've said before, I'll say it again, Andrea, I think Donald Trump's behavior after the election of 2020 disqualifies him from ever serving in public office, in my view. I don't think he will be the Republican nominee. We have a strong bench. We have strong governors. We have senators. We have people from the business world. I think we will have a multi-candidate competitive primary, and we'll nominate a strong candidate who I think will go on to win. But I don't think it's going to be Donald Trump.
What's ahead for you?
I'm figuring that out. I've only been out of office for 2 weeks and 2 days, so I'm kind of thinking that through. But I'll be working in the private sector, and I'm looking forward to it.
Well, come back and talk to us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Always good to have you.
Great
Pat
to
Toomey
be
from
back.
Pennsylvania.